Hello and welcome to Payments Unfiltered, powered by Primer. I'm your host, Theo Spyrides, Head of Product at Primer. And we're welcoming back James Fry, Head of Enterprise Product at Worldpay, now Global Payments. When we had James in the studio earlier this year, we couldn't pass up the opportunity to spend a bit more time with him talking about how to build a payments product at global scale. We dive into how he thinks about what belongs in the PSP stack, how to think about the trade-offs between modular and end-to-end approaches, but also how his team prioritize. Let's dive into the conversation. James, thanks for staying to record a second episode. For this episode, we're going to take a slightly different approach. You are obviously been at Worldpay, which is now being acquired by Global Payments for over 10 years. And I'd love to kind of explore maybe a bit more of the product side of your role versus like the payments ecosystem. So let's see where we go with this.
Okay.
My opening question, and I'll follow your lead. How do you build a PSP?
Yeah, I mean, not that I've Worldpay's PSP predates me, but and the investment there. But I think there's a lot that goes into that, because ultimately when you say a PSP, that can mean many things to many people, right? A payment service provider could, in the past, just mean a gateway that the rawest form, it used to be a gateway that connects a merchant to an acquirer, right? Because the messaging integrations into acquirers was complex and hard, right? So it was, how do you simplify the ability to integrate into the ecosystem, right? So that's what really a PSP was years ago. It was I need to take a payment. I have no idea how to do an Apex certification or a ISO 8583 layer. I need to do something nice and simple, from a simple HTML post to get a hosted page if you're an SMB to an API integration. So, at its rawest form, is a case of saying, I as a merchant have a consumer who needs to take a transaction, potentially from their card, and they need to get a message to their issuer. How do I get that message to the issuer? And ultimately, that's what's born the ecosystem. And payment service provision or gateways have probably grown, mostly grown from incumbent acquirers who've tried to make it easier for merchants to integrate. And that's become the industry that we see today. But there's so much more that goes into a PSP now. Again, what payment methods you want to accept. So reducing the amount of times you as a merchant have to integrate to get to cards, to get to alternative payment methods, to get to value-add services like authentication, fraud, routing logic. So all of these things have started to come into it, where it's actually about how you can create a sophisticated platform that allows a merchant to get the most without having to do that. So when you're building a PSP, it can be, again, from the most base level of I want to create that kind of communication channel between a merchant who's wanting to sell their product to a payment player downstream, which ultimately there is someone who has a funding instrument that is where the consumer wishes to pay from. But then that's obviously got many facets to it, as I said. So typically you'd expect a PSP then to have those other connectivity, either to their own proprietary technology, if they have their own fraud engine, to being able to connect out to multiple fraud engines, right? And say, hey, you can come to me and say, my fraud provider is X, but I want to, my payment, my acquirer is Y, can you connect me to those? So really what you're trying to do is reduce the technical burden and the complexity on the merchant, right, to navigate the ecosystem. And as we all know, the payments landscape is pretty large. There's lots of assets to it, especially if you're a global organization. So really it's about, helping to build out that connectivity. And I would say really what also underpins that is having something that's scalable, that's reliable, that's compliant, because again, there are many changes on an annual basis that come from the schemes, that come from other players, which is, hey, here's a new upgrade, or here's a new thing you need to do, and you need to then change your systems. And ideally, the PSP will try and shield whatever possible from the merchant, right? Which is, I have to change this message, but I'll do it on your behalf, and you don't need to worry about it. And minimizing the amount of times that a merchant has to spend their time and money and resources navigating payments, as opposed to doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is, how do I, market my product or products or goods or services to my consumer base?
So the first place I want to start, because you raised a lot of great points there. I don't think people really appreciate the scheme relationship, the change in mandates. Could you maybe do a 101? How does that relationship work? And what is the effort that you need to do to maintain compliance?
So a lot of I would say the main network relationship or expectations on the acquirers, because they're the ones that are part of the scheme network. They're bought into it. An acquirer has done, essentially a PSP, as I said earlier, PSP simplifies the acquirer connection. Acquirers simplify communicating with the schemes in the network. So you have to be part of that network. You have to buy into it. And you can imagine, as I'm sure, merchants will feel this less so, but still will feel this on an annual basis. The number of changes that come down from networks it could be pricing changes, it could be new fields and formats that need to happen. I mean, so we're seeing a lot of push towards using network payment tokens and saying that's the gold standard, and using full pan anymore is not a good transaction. So all of these things have to be taken into account, right? So you can have hundreds of changes on an annual basis.
Wow,
hundreds.
That surprises me.
We spend a huge amount of time, right? In product, in engineering, we call it KTLO, or keep the lights on. Like, what are the things you have to do to continue doing what you do today? And that could be stuff internally. My architecture has to be, and my architecture has to be compliant, secure, stable, performant, that I can handle high volume events. But also, am I in compliance with the networks, with APM providers? So again, we often talk about the card networks, but APM players, they change their schemes. They have updates on a less regular basis, but just recently, an APM provider went from a version 1 to a version 2, and it was fundamentally different, right? It was a reintegration. So someone has to manage that, and ultimately that's what the PSP is there to try and do, right? It's trying to shield some of the I would say the volume of change that happens in this industry.
And you talked about acquirers. So how do you pick your mesh of acquirers to be able to process globally?
Well, I mean, no one acquirer can process in every single country. So it really depends on, I would say, especially if we talk about like large enterprise customers, you typically see merchants have at least 2 acquirers in their core markets for reliability, backup, A/B testing, performance testing, that sort of stuff. But then also you may then have it because you've got a market where you can't access it through, a global player, and you need a local player. There's many different reasons behind it. So I think ultimately what you need to look at is what's the surface area of your business, and ultimately what you're trying to always do is not have too many contracts, integrations, relationships. So how can you get the right mix, and make sure that you're working with an acquirer or a PSP that can support you in the right way and can, I would say, help you in that journey, because ultimately every market's different. It has its nuances. So you have to understand how you navigate that.
And maybe a stupid question, right? But I've been in payments for a while, and even it's not even super clear to me, but like, would you define Worldpay as an acquirer? Like, does it have acquiring licenses in certain regions?
Very good question. If you ask most of the market what Worldpay is, they would say an acquirer. That's a fair assumption. We are, and our biggest product is acquiring. We offer domestic processing in 45 markets. Sorry, we have 45 markets with our own license, but we offer them in over 70 countries through partners. So Worldpay is an acquirer in its own right, and we operate in many, many markets across the globe, which means we have an entity, a license, operations on the floor where it's required. But then Worldpay is actually a full stack payment provider. So we offer gateway services, of which many of them are microservices that you can take on their own or in conjunction with other products and services. We orchestrate payments, right? We orchestrate to payment providers, to other acquirers, to partners of ours that open up geographies or regions for us. We can orchestrate. So there's a whole host of stuff that happens within that. So if you really look at Worldpay, it's like take acceptance of payments. It's then optimization of your payments, whether that's fraud, authentication. You've got value add services like payouts, FX as a kind of value add service as well, right? Turning a cost center into a profit center. All of these things combined is what Worldpay is. But yes, I would say most people in the market would consider Worldpay first as an acquirer, which again is fair. But there's a lot more that's offered as part of that, and really the biggest value is what you can offer on the value add on the front end, right? Which is the data that we have. We processed over $2.5 trillion as part of Worldpay alone last year. So huge volume of data, and which shows scalability and resilience, but also that we've got data to get informed decisions about how transactions and how to route them effectively.
So it's almost like Worldpay is both an acquirer and a PSP and because you have all these value services, and what you're saying is you can swap out the acquirer maybe because a merchant has a preference, or maybe like in some markets you need to go to a different third party.
Absolutely, and at the end of the day, we work with the largest customers in the world, and as I said earlier, most large merchants won't have a single acquirer in a market, but if we as a gateway can say, well, you come to us as an acquirer, and of course we'd love it to be across that space, but you also want to connect to another acquirer, either we have that connection and you can go and utilize it, or we'll look at a business case to add another acquirer as a connection behind us. So there has to be a level of agnosticism, even when you come to I guess we're seen as a large incumbent player as an acquirer, right? Again, so we're not truly agnostic in that space in terms of saying that, but we understand that you may want to take certain products and services as a standalone. That could be something as simple as we have a vaulting service, right? It's basically a credential forwarding that means that you can have a token vault that allows you to send traffic to Worldpay or to someone else. There is, and it is a product on of itself. Or you may want to use our fraud tool, and you may want to use us for fraud, but payments might come to us, but they might also need to go somewhere else. Again, tokenization. So there's lots of things that are agnostic to acquiring, or even to necessarily traditional gateway routing and things like that. It could be a standalone service you want to consume. There is always value in, I would say, full stack service, because it means you've got all of the data points.
I was actually going to
ask you can then get to a point where you can probably inform and help even more so than if you only see part of that transaction or part of the end to end of a transaction. So and of course, there are pros and cons of both of that, but we're under no illusions that we expect a large merchant to come to us and say, we're going to work with you and only you, and that's fine, right? So we are open to being flexible around that, because that's ultimately it's what our customers need, and we think is the right thing to do.
Gotcha. So modularity by design makes a lot of sense. And how important is the developer experience to a PSP?
Super important, and I think we've done a lot in this space in the last couple of years, and I think more to do. There are certainly players who have always gone in dev first or dev experience first, right? So there is now in the buying decision CTOs and developers that are part of the influential group that say whether to work with someone or not. So being able to be easy to understand, have documentation that's easy to understand, consume, that it's easy to get into a sandbox environment and test, and do some discovery, is really key to prove the products you have, the experience you would have in actually utilizing the payment provision, so be it gateway services or other services off of that. It really is key, and there's lots more, I think, to do in that space, which is not only I would say, the ability to understand and to go in and see the documentation, but also how can you demo your products and your tools? Have you got things that can show the customer experience and the developer experience? So this is what it looks like in the checkout, and in the background here are the message you would send or the SDKs you would use in order to get this experience. I'm
so glad you raised Sandbox. It really upsets me how little some people invest into that part of the developer experience. At Primer, we've built, over 140 plus integrations in production. We're pretty good at building integrations. The amount of times we build an integration in Sandbox, we start rolling out in production, and oh yeah, no, of course the behavior is different at Sandbox. It's well, as a developer, I don't know that.
Yeah.
And I have to build against a Sandbox. So I think it's a great call out. I think it's one of the underrated parts of building a great kind of payment API is to really think about how developer built into it.
Absolutely. And I think it comes from this kind of thing of, you want to build stuff and get it out there and get it utilized. But, ultimately for a merchant, they want to go in, test it out, understand what this really means, what does this actually mean if I were to put this into operations, like from a financial perspective, from an operational perspective, from a, back end systems, like that, what's updating the various parts of my systems to understand that I've taken a transaction, I know the outcome, here's the next actions I can take, so all of this stuff is really key, right? So I think being able to create the ability to test and play with different configurations is what gives you the confidence to then go live. To go in blindly would be, it's not it's not the desired approach, right? And I think we always need to make sure we try and keep, the sandbox should be an exact mirror of production where it can be, right? And there are different ways of doing this, because some of them are stubbed. It's an integration sandbox versus sometimes when you want to see the full end-to-end financial process, it's more around creating that kind of pre-prod environment and doing stuff there. So I think there's various levels of that, but it's super key, right? No one would go and do something without kind of wanting to test it out, right? So try before you buy.
Exactly right. Okay, so as a seasoned kind of product leader, I'm very interested. Obviously, you can only talk to your experiences, but like, how do you think about slicing the org and building a scalable, effective product function at Worldpay?
I think that there's so many different ways you could do this. I think it depends on the size of the organization as well. I mean, to me, ultimately, you would want squads tied around propositions. And really, when I say a proposition, is you're solving a customer need. An example could be we want to create an end-to-end marketplaces proposition that serves all the different things that a marketplace may need, whether it's seller onboarding, KYC, split payments, payouts. Which actually, when you take that as a proposition, an end-to-end customer experience, which I call it, that's kind of the what and the why. Like, what are we building? Why are we building it? What's the business case? What are we trying to solve for? And this is really in the PDLC, or the product development lifecycle, kind of the explore stage. Like, what could we do here? What does it need to? And really, you need to not be thinking about the reality of what you can or can't do. Right? It's like, what would good look like? And that really comes to a really key thing, which is like, okay, what does that happen? And then you need to get into the how, right? So like, how am I going to build this? And this then goes into like I would say the product delivery side, which is like, okay, I now need to build this product. What does my stack look like, and how do I need to distribute my teams to build effectively? I do think if you have people that live and breathe the what and the why into the how, you're going to get a really good delivery of something that you wanted, and people are looking to the left and the right, saying, well, I'm building something on the gateway here, but it's going to go to the acquiring platform, or it's going to go to this downstream system. Does it work? If the thing I do here doesn't work and it breaks something there, then we haven't got an end-to-end experience. So I do think you need that kind of visibility and alignment across there. But in some large organizations, and Worldpay included, you also have platforms that need deep subject matter expertise, and there's people who really understand how everything works. So what you almost have is a kind of a virtual squad that sits across what we call domains, which would be people that own like a subset, like money, like all the things to do with settlement and everything else. They are experts in that space, working with banks and all, and so on and so forth. But a handful of them will be aligned to delivering our marketplace proposition. So that's kind of the way to do it. But again, in a smaller organization, and maybe with like just one single stack, you would just have squads, right? You'd have squads that say, okay, you're going to work with this value proposition, and that's your life. You live, you breathe, and you build it across what it needs to be. But I think that has to overlay anything we do. So within Worldpay, I'm a segment lead, so I'm end-to-end enterprise, which means I have to engage across the product organization to make sure that we're building things that work for the customer, work for our merchants, but have been built in the right way. So you're engaging with those domain expertise as well. So
I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah.
So you lead the enterprise kind of segment.
Yeah.
What's your kind of surface area of collaboration with other teams? I imagine like every team is a surface.
Everyone.
Yeah.
So I before I joined product, like informally, I was running our geo expansion program, and it didn't sit in product. I had to work with every single product lead because we were building stuff that was on the front end integration, and it's on our gateway. It was then on our acquiring platform where we're adding a new entities and bins and setting up settlement processes, and you're then feeding it into the team who want to make sure that data is fed into our portals from a chargeback. So you're engaging across everyone. So my team's role is to understand the end-to-end proposition for our customers, and that then goes into my product peers who look after those specific areas of capabilities, and say, okay, we need to deliver this proposition. I need your team to be able to kind of, these are the requirements. Right? How do we get there? So really, I'm having to navigate the organization, and ultimately.
And do you have to persuade as well?
I mean, obviously, with any organization, right, you've got 100 things you want to do and there's 20 you can do, right? So there's ruthless prioritization, there's trade-offs. We have 3 lines of business. We run SMB, platform, and enterprise. So we have to make sure we're making the right choices. That's the right thing for the business. So there is an element of, the friction, the puts and takes of saying, well, how do I get what I need to get done for my segment and for my line of business? But ultimately, the biggest piece is to say, well, here's our priority list. This is stuff we know we need to do, and then how do we then we drive it into there and get it resourced, delivered, and taken into the go-to-market model, right, where we commercialize it and make sure the teams know how to talk to our customers about it.
And how frequent are you having these negotiations and planning cycles?
Constantly, right? So we run Safe Agile within Worldpay. We run it, so we do 10-week planning increments. So we have teams where we have to go and say, here's our priority, here's the stuff that we think we're going to take into PI. So there's always going to be trade-off conversations about saying, okay, we've got these 3 things we need to do. We think we've got capacity for 2 of them. So which one are we going to have to do, and manage those expectations internally and externally? Because sometimes we're building stuff that merchants, and of course, that merchants are asking for. So those things happen all the time, and we also put into place. And I'm actually going to be in Orlando next week for the next one. It's called a quarterly product review. So essentially, all of product and engineering. So again, we're being very product focused, but really it's product and engineering that kind of 2 in a box that own the outcomes, right? It's not just the product side; it's how it's built and delivered. But we do quarterly product reviews where we go across the segments and what we call domains, but essentially those capabilities. And we talk about what's important, how we're doing against business priorities, how we're tracking against our OKRs, objectives and key results, right, which will be revenue focused, performance focused, team focused, and we'll surface up those spicy conversations, those spicy subjects where we need to scale, bubble up resource in a certain area to be able to get something delivered, or we need to think about which resource can we pull onto something to make it happen. So I think it's always about that open communication, and there's always going to be puts and takes in any size organization, because you're always going to have more demand than supply, right? Because there's so much going on in the payments industry.
And how much of that's bottom up versus top down?
So you've definitely got your priorities that are kind of, I would say, kind of top down, in the sense of, like, we know the strategic direction we want to get to, but nothing happens without collaboration of the teams, which is, because at the end of the day, discretionary spend in an organization is only part of your capital outlay. So here's the things I'd like to do, but there's also the things I have to do, which KTLO, right? How do I keep my platforms performant, reliable, compliant? And then you've got kind of, mandatory change. So again, if network changes come in or APM providers change specs, you have to factor that work in, because you might have a time frame with which to deliver it. You also have stuff that comes in from regulators in countries where there might be a new thing you have to do. It could be around data localization. It could be around all sorts of things that you have to build in. And then you've kind of got your discretionary pool, which is that other stuff. So you've got, essentially any dev, any squad or dev team that's working on something has to split their time between all of those. Some things are non-negotiable and some things are negotiable, even though they're stuff you really want to do. And it's always that balancing act to get it as the best possible outcome for the business and ultimately for our customers.
Yeah, I always describe it as like an art versus a science. Like if prioritization was a formula, then like everyone would have the best possible product, right? But like there is a bit of an art to it around like bucketing work, creating the right mental models for this discussion, the debate, and figuring out your bets, how you resource them. So I think everything you said is very much my experience when we approach planning.
I think, sometimes there's complexity in larger organizations where you're navigating a bigger surface area of teams and
like
people.
How many PMs do you have?
In my team, there's I think I've got about 100 people at the moment in total. That's across proposition leads and product managers. but the organizer, there's obviously a lot of other people outside of my immediate team. So we have a I would say an adequate size for the size of our organization, but it's no small organization. And managing all of that is obviously a big thing. But in a small organization, you're still going to have that long list, that laundry list of things that people want you to do, and it's up to that's the job of a product lead, right? It's okay. I get all of this input, which could be merchant led change. It could be things that a leader says we need to do this thing because I've looked forward and I think this is going to be something we need to make sure we've got on our stack. To those things that you have to do, and say, right, okay, how do I work with my counterparts to get the best possible outcome? And that's the art, as you said. It's how do you fit the things in best as you can to deliver the best outcomes.
So if that wasn't complicated enough, I know Worldpay has recently been acquired by Global Payments.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'd love to hear more around like the why, like what are the benefits, like what do you see as the opportunities there, but also the how. Like how do you bring two companies together, think about combining technologies, think about combining culture? Like I don't think that story's told often. So I'd love to kind of maybe ask you that kind of two-pronged. Where do you see the opportunities, but also the how?
I think there's some clear opportunities here in the sense that Global Payments is extremely strong in like SMB and particularly card present, and particularly also my world in the world of enterprise, we're very focused on enterprise customers, and actually a lot of that's card not present, right, the e-com space. So there's a lot of synergy in the best of the two companies coming together. So being able to leverage those capabilities to support merchants of any size. So there's a clear kind of I would say obvious reason for these two companies coming together. And as you said, and what we're going through at the moment is continually focusing on our BAU. We've got our strategy. We need to deliver the things that we've promised, but we do need to also address, obviously, bringing the organizations together, making sure that the teams are aligned. So there's a lot of, meeting your counterparts, your peers, getting the org structure in place. And then ultimately, there'll be opportunities where we say, okay, here's some immediate things we could do that create benefit for our customers, right? It could be a new market or a new, bringing some technology from Global Payments to our enterprise Worldpay customers. So obviously looking very much at that. And then ultimately, both companies have a very similar culture and values, and therefore it's actually been a very nice kind of mixture of the two businesses. And ultimately, the big focus here is about how we deliver more value for our customers, and that's ultimately what we're driving towards. And I think, there was already a view of how we continually, on both sides, of how to continue to make it easier to do business with the organisation. So making it easier to integrate, making it easier to operate financially and operationally. So I think there's a lot of synergies there, and really, it's the power of the combination, right? So bringing them together, we get to use the best parts of both organisations to support our customers.
And are you going to like bridge the tech stacks? Like, how does that work in this kind of big merger like this, or do you kind of keep them completely separate?
I think the reality is there'll be a conversation around there'll be technologies that we can use across all the lines of business. So really, what we think about is our lines of business, which is the SMB world, the kind of platforms world, like embedded payments, and the enterprise line of business. So yes, of course, you've got two companies coming together, and in reality, over time, there'll be things that we can do that'll be beneficial, right? So leveraging a piece of technology, and ultimately over time, right, it's all about making sure we keep things simple for our merchants. So all of those things will be conversations as we go forward. Early days at the moment, but yeah, certainly will be discussed in the future.
And you, as like a product leader owning like that segment, do you have now a responsibility to kind of like go and figure out like, oh wow, Global Payments can do all of these things. I can take all of these things and like bring them to my merchants. Like, is that something that every leader's responsible for? Is there someone like owning how to get the best of both worlds?
It's a mixture of a number of people, but yeah, that's the exciting thing, right? There's like really great things that we're saying, oh wow, it'd be amazing if we could, take this capability, and how could we then, put this with our existing capabilities to better service an enterprise customer? So really, the exciting thing at the moment is meeting my new colleagues, understanding what they're responsible for, and saying, oh, this would be amazing to bring into this customer base or this segment. And we're, and obviously that's a big thing we're doing. Like, those are the synergies of bringing a company together, which is, the power of the two companies combined. So that's the exciting thing that's happening, which is, we've got a lot of opportunities to deliver more value to our customers, and it will be through, again, whether it's a Worldpay product or capability that we can bring into the global stack, or the other way around. So yeah, that's the fun stuff.
Awesome. And I guess you now need to upskill and learn a whole new kind of product suite. And
the payments industry is, as we all know, very complicated. And I always say to everyone, I learn something new every day. And I will continue to learn something, at least one thing new every day. So yes, it's lots to learn, but they're solving customer problems and customer need, right? So when we talk about a proposition, and my job is end-to-end proposition, it's not like learning a new language, or a language or something I've never understood before. It's a capability that we said, oh, that would be great. We don't have something quite like that at the moment, so this is how we would bring it in. So it's obviously it's a learning experience, but it's across the things that both companies care about, which is servicing customers of all sizes, right, irrespective of channel.
And if someone's listening and they're building payment technology, what maybe be like the one advice you'd give from like a product perspective around like where to be like really deliberate about and make sure you make the right decision there? Like what would be that piece of advice you'd give them?
I think if you're trying to build something to solve a problem, right? That's generally why you're building a product, right? It's to solve a problem or a need of a merchant. So that's only going to be successful if you have a customer help you through that process, right? So I think engaging with your client base, understanding things that they find difficult or challenging to overcome, that then comes into the product design, right? So when we talk about the explore stage of a product delivery, it's that what and the why. Like, wow, so okay, why are we building something? Okay, there's a known problem statement that we want to solve here, and then having those friendly merchants throughout the process. You ask, you get that feedback. You continue have that feedback loop as you go through the build, design phase, which is, this is what we're thinking of. Does it resonate with you? Do you think that's right? Or do you think we're missing anything? There's no monopoly on good ideas, and ultimately, you need to be engaging with the end users of the product you're building to say, is this thing I'm doing what you want? So I think really if you get that bit right, the rest will start to fall in place.
So make sure you work super close with your persona, design with them, build with them, ship with them, iterate fast, then kind of go general availability. Like that's kind of your playbook.
Agree. Yes, it is. And also as well, don't try and solve everything at once. As you said, like have a persona. So sometimes you will have a product that could be across multiple, that could be relevant to multiple industries, to multiple merchant sizes, but you generally have that first use case or that first need. Trying to solve everything at once can turn into a never-ending project that's hard to get off the ground. So you have to make sure you're solving for the right thing first. And then, as you said, once you get a product into pilot and GA, that's not the end of the story, right? So, at the end of, I always used to break it down, but explore and define, and then you build the product, and then you've kind of got your go-to-market aspect, and it's in the sales force, they know what's going on, and we can get this product out, and it's working. Then you've got this forever iterative process, which is, I need to improve that product, I need to enhance that product, something brand new's happened, I need to react to, right? So you need to have ownership of what you build in perpetuity.
And maybe last question on this, like how often do you want your team talking to merchants?
As much as possible. I always think it's not as much as we would like, but whenever possible, whether it's going to business reviews with the commercial team, whether it's one of our kind of events that we have on a regular basis, where we have customers there, having product folk to go there and to talk to customers to understand their pain points, the things they need, the things they want. So whenever we can get the product organization in front of clients is great, because you're hearing directly from the consumers of our products what the experience is. And invariably they've used that product day in, day out, and will have a really, really insightful understanding of it that you're going to learn from. So the more the better, I would say.
Nice. There's nothing better than actually sitting next to a merchant using the product.
Yeah.
It's like one of my favorite sessions that we get to have.
Seeing something work and then being happy with something is the best part of the job, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's a good place to end. James, thanks so much for your time. It's been great speaking.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Thank you again to James for joining this episode of Payments Unfiltered. If you enjoyed the episode, there are many more conversations with other people working in the payments industry. Please go to YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to go check them out. And I'll see you next time.